The first cry pierced the howling wind just as Cain's claws opened my throat. Blood, warm and metallic, spilled into the pristine snow beneath me as my newborn son took his first breath. The irony wasn't lost on me, life and death, beginning and ending, all in the space of a heartbeat. Cain stood over me, his golden eyes cold as winter stone, while Celine Ravencrest clung to his arm like the precious prize she believed herself to be. "It's done," Cain said, his voice carrying no trace of the man who had whispered sweet promises in my ear just months ago. "I, Cain Blackmoon, reject you, Lyra Ashworth, as my mate." The mate bond snapped like a taut wire, sending agony through every nerve in my body. I gasped, clutching my baby closer to my chest as the pack gathered around us in a loose circle. Their faces held nothing but disgust and cruel amusement. To them, I was entertainment, the lowest Omega getting her comeuppance. "Look at her," Celine laughed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Cain's muscled forearm. "Bleeding like a stuck pig in the snow. How pathetic." The blizzard had come out of nowhere, as spring storms often did in the mountains. What should have been a simple pack run had turned into something else entirely when my water broke. I'd begged Cain to help me, to at least find shelter, but he'd chosen that moment to make his announcement. The Alpha's daughter was worth more than a lifetime with me. Alpha Ravencrest stepped forward, his massive frame blocking out what little light filtered through the storm clouds. "You have no place in Black Moon territory anymore, Omega. Take your bastard and leave." "She'll never make it," someone called out from the crowd. "Not in this storm." "Good," Celine purred. "One less mouth to feed." A rock struck my shoulder, then another hit my leg. The pack began to close in, their eyes glowing with pack mentality and bloodlust. "My son, my beautiful boy," wailed against the cold, his tiny fists waving helplessly. "Please," I whispered, looking up at Cain one last time. "He's your son." Cain's jaw tightened, but Celine's laughter rang out like breaking glass. "That thing could belong to anyone. Everyone knows how Omegas spread their legs." The lie cut deeper than his claws had. Cain knew, we both knew, that I'd never been with anyone else. But admitting that meant admitting our child was legitimate, and legitimacy meant complications for his new perfect life. More stones flew. One caught me in the temple, sending stars across my vision. Blood ran freely now, mixing with the falling snow until I couldn't tell where I ended and the storm began. My baby's cries grew weaker, and panic clawed at my chest. They were going to let us die here. The pack began to turn away, following Cain and Celine back toward the warmth of the pack house. Their laughter echoed through the trees, fading with their footsteps until only the wind remained. The cold seeped through my thin clothes, through my skin, settling into my bones like ice. I tried to shift, to find my wolf's warmth, but she was as broken as I was. The rejection had damaged something fundamental in both of us. My limbs felt heavy, foreign, as hypothermia began its deadly work. "I'm sorry," I whispered to my son, pressing my lips to his tiny forehead. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." His breathing was growing shallow. We had minutes, maybe less. That's when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the clearing like she'd materialized from the storm itself, a woman dressed in silver and moonlight, her hair white as fresh snow and her eyes ancient as the mountains. When she moved, the air around her shimmered with otherworldly power. "You called to me in your desperation, child," she said, her voice carrying on the wind without being touched by it. "But power comes with a price." I blinked, certain I was hallucinating. "Who are you?" "I am what remains of the old ways. The moon spirits your people have forgotten." She knelt beside me, her presence radiating warmth that made my son stop crying. "Your bloodline carries the ancient gift, dormant for generations. I can awaken it, but once done, it cannot be undone." "I don't understand." "You will." She placed a glowing hand over my heart. "Make the oath, Lyra Ashworth. Swear your life to the old magic, and I will give you the power to survive. To thrive. To make them all remember why Omegas were once feared." The baby stirred in my arms, his eyes opening to reveal irises that sparkled like starlight. In that moment, I saw our future, not the death I'd expected, but something else entirely. Something that would shake the very foundations of the pack hierarchy. I swear it, I gasped, my blood seeping into the snow beneath us. By my blood, by my child's life, by the ancient laws they've forgotten, I swear it. The spirit smiled, and her form began to fade. Then rise, daughter of the old bloodline. Rise and reclaim what was always yours. Power flooded through me like liquid fire. My wounds began to heal, the cold retreated, and somewhere deep inside, my wolf stirred with a strength I'd never felt before. This wasn't the broken, submissive Omega they'd left to die. This was something else entirely. I pulled my son closer and stood, my legs steady despite everything that had happened. The storm was already beginning to clear, revealing the lights of the pack house in the distance. They thought they'd seen the last of me. They were wrong. The old bloodlines remembered, and they were about to learn what happened when you threw away something precious. My son looked up at me with those impossible eyes, and I smiled. Don't worry, little one, I whispered, my breath no longer forming clouds in the frigid air. Mama's going to make sure they never forget us again. In the distance, a wolf howled, but it wasn't from the Black Moon pack. It was something older, wilder, calling to the power now flowing through my veins. The moon spirits had awakened more than just my dormant abilities. They'd awakened my destiny. I turned my back on the pack that had abandoned us and walked into the storm, my son safe in my arms and ancient magic singing in my blood. Behind us, the snow began to fall harder, as if the very sky was washing away the last traces of who I used to be. When morning came, there would be nothing left but footprints leading into the wilderness, and the growing legend of what I would become. Chapter 2. 3 days. That's how long I wandered through the wilderness before my body finally gave out. 3 days of trudging through snow that seemed to part before me, of finding shelter in caves that appeared just when I needed them most, of watching my son, my miracle, grow stronger while I grew weaker. The ancient magic had kept us alive, but even old power had its limits. I collapsed at the mouth of what looked like an abandoned wolf den, my legs finally refusing to carry me another step. Asher, I'd named him during our second night under the stars, made soft mewling sounds against my chest. He was warm, impossibly warm for a newborn, and his eyes had remained that startling silver blue that marked him as something special. Something different. Just like me. The den smelled of old earth and forgotten secrets. I crawled inside, pulling dried leaves and debris around us in a pitiful attempt at warmth. My milk had dried up that morning, and Asher would need food soon. The thought of failing him, of surviving Cain's betrayal only to watch my child waste away, made my chest tight with panic. I'm sorry, I whispered, stroking his downy hair. I'm so sorry, little wolf. That's when the scent hit me. Male. Alpha. But unlike any I'd ever encountered. It was wild and untamed, carrying notes of pine and midnight rain, but underneath lay something else, something that made every instinct I possessed go completely silent. Not the silence of submission, but the profound quiet that comes before lightning strikes. The footsteps were almost soundless, just the barest whisper of movement across snow. If not for his scent, I never would have known he was there until he spoke. You're dying. His voice was deep, rough with disuse, and carried an accent I couldn't place. I pressed myself deeper into the den, clutching Asher protectively. After Cain's betrayal, trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Stay back, I managed, though my voice came out as barely more than a croak. A low chuckle, rich and dark. If I meant you harm, Omega, you'd already be dead. He moved into view, and my breath caught. He was massive, taller and broader than even Alpha Ravencrest, with long black hair that hung loose around his shoulders. His clothes were simple but well-made, dark leather and rough wool that suggested someone who lived apart from pack politics and social hierarchies. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. Silver. Pure, liquid silver that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Who are you? I whispered. Someone who's been waiting. He crouched at the den's entrance, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. The question is whether you're ready to live or if you prefer to fade away in this hole. Asher stirred in my arms, turning his tiny face toward the stranger. Instead of crying, he made a soft cooing sound, the first time he'd seemed truly content since we'd left the pack. It should have been warning enough. I can smell the old magic on you, the stranger continued, his silver gaze never leaving mine. Freshly awakened but untrained. Dangerous. His lips curved in something that might have been a smile. I like dangerous. I don't know what you're talking about. The moon spirits don't make bargains lightly, Lyra Ashworth. And they certainly don't grant power without purpose. The fact that he knew my name should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if this meeting had been written in the stars long before I was born. How do you know who you are? Know what you've become? He extended one large hand toward me, palm up. Because I've been watching the Black Moon pack for a very long time, waiting for the bloodline to manifest. Waiting for you. Against every rational thought in my head, I found myself reaching toward his outstretched hand. The moment our skin touched, warmth flooded through me like summer sunshine. The exhaustion that had been dragging at my limbs for days simply vanished. My name is Damon, he said softly. And you're coming home with me. I should have protested. Should have demanded answers or insisted I could take care of myself and Asher alone. But the truth was, I couldn't. Whatever strength the moon spirits had given me was still too new, too raw. I needed time to understand what I'd become, and time was a luxury that required safety. Safety I couldn't provide on my own. Why? I asked instead. Why help us? His silver eyes flicked to Asher, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Because some debts run deeper than pack politics. Because the old ways still matter to those who remember them. He scooped me up as if I weighed nothing, cradling both Asher and me against his chest. His scent enveloped us, that wild, otherworldly fragrance that made my wolf pace restlessly beneath my skin. She wanted to roll in it, to mark herself with it, and the intensity of her reaction sent alarm bells through my mind. Mate bonds didn't form this quickly. Couldn't form this quickly, especially not when my bond with Cain had only been severed 3 days ago. But my wolf didn't seem to care about impossibilities. Damon's cabin appeared through the trees like something from a fairy tale, all dark wood and glowing windows, smoke rising from a stone chimney to be swallowed by the storm. It was larger than I'd expected, built with the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of both wealth and permanence. You live alone? I asked as he carried us up the front steps. I prefer solitude. He pushed open the heavy door with his shoulder. Until now. The interior was warm and welcoming, all leather furniture and rich fabrics surrounding a massive stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that looked ancient and expensive. Nothing about this place suggested a rogue wolf scraping by on the edges of civilization. Everything about it whispered power. Old power. Damon set me down gently on a leather couch that was softer than anything I'd ever touched in the Black Moon pack house. He moved with fluid grace to stoke the fire, then disappeared into another room, returning with blankets and what looked like medical supplies. You're hurt, he said, settling beside me with careful precision. I touched my throat where Cain's claws had raked across my skin. The wounds had healed during our journey, another impossible thing to add to my growing list, but dried blood still crusted my neck and collar. I heal fast now, I said, more to myself than to him. The awakening. Damon's fingers were gentle as he cleaned the remaining blood away with a warm cloth. Your body is changing, adapting to what you've become. The first few weeks are always the most dramatic. You talk like you've seen this before. I have. His touch stilled for a moment. Though not for a very long time. Questions burned on my tongue, but Asher chose that moment to announce his hunger with a wail that could have woken the dead. I tried to position him to nurse, but my body was still too depleted to produce milk. He needs food, I said, panic edging into my voice. Damon disappeared again, returning with a small bottle filled with what looked like warm milk. When I raised an eyebrow, he shrugged. I was prepared. Prepared for what, exactly? A random Omega and her pup to collapse on your doorstep? Prepared for you. He settled back on the couch, his presence both comforting and unsettling. I told you, I've been waiting. I fed Asher, marveling at how eagerly he took the bottle, how his tiny hands seemed to know exactly how to grip it. Everything about him was advanced, too knowing for a 3-day-old pup. He's beautiful, Damon said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made me look up sharply. You sound surprised. Not surprised. Relieved. His silver eyes met mine. Ancient bloodlines don't always breed true. Sometimes the power skips generations, sometimes it manifests in ways that are difficult to control. And Asher? Asher is perfect. The certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. How can you possibly know that? Instead of answering, Damon stood and moved to the window, staring out at the storm with an intensity that suggested he was seeing more than just wind and snow. His shoulders were tense, alert, like a predator scenting danger. We should eat, he said finally. You need to regain your strength. The subject change was obviously deliberate, but I was too exhausted to push. I followed him to a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine, all granite counters and gleaming appliances that must have cost more than most pack members made in a year. What do you do? I asked as he pulled ingredients from a refrigerator that was better stocked than the Black Moon Pack's communal stores. I collect things. He began assembling what looked like a substantial meal with practiced efficiency. Art, books, artifacts. Items of historical significance. That pays well. I've had time to accumulate wealth. Time. He said it like he'd had centuries rather than years. I studied his profile as he cooked, taking in the sharp cheekbones and strong jaw, the way he moved with predatory grace. He looked maybe 30, but something about him suggested much, much older. How long have you been waiting for me? Longer than you might believe. That's not an answer. He turned then, and those silver eyes pinned me in place. Sometimes answers create more questions than they resolve. Are you ready for that level of complexity, Lyra? Before I could respond, a sound from outside made us both freeze. It was distant but unmistakable, howls. Multiple wolves, moving fast through the forest. They're tracking you, Damon said, his voice going flat and dangerous. The pack? Kane and his new mate, along with several others. They've been following your scent for hours. I clutched Asher closer. Why would they bother? They made it clear they wanted nothing to do with us. Because you survived. Damon's hands had gone very still where they rested on the counter. And because smart alphas don't leave loose ends. The howls were getting closer. Through the window, I could see shapes moving between the trees, dark forms loping through the snow with deadly purpose. What do we do? Damon turned to face me fully, and for a moment, his human mask slipped. What looked back at me was ancient and predatory and utterly without mercy. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. We? His voice had gone soft, which somehow made it infinitely more threatening. You're going to take your son upstairs and lock yourselves in the back bedroom. And I'm going to remind your former pack why smart wolves don't hunt on my territory. I won't hide while you fight my battles. You will. The command hit me with alpha force, but instead of making me submit, it sparked something rebellious in my chest. The power the moon spirits had awakened didn't recognize his authority. Because if Kane sees what you've become before you learn to control it, he'll kill you both to prevent whatever threat he thinks you represent. And what have I become? His smile was sharp as winter wind. Something they should have feared from the beginning. The howls were right outside now. Through the front window, I could see golden eyes reflecting the firelight, see the massive forms of black moon wolves circling the cabin like vultures. Upstairs. Now. Damon's voice brooked no argument. And whatever you hear, whatever happens, don't come down until I call for you. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand he explain everything, who he was, what he knew about my bloodline, why he'd been waiting for me. But Asher made a soft sound against my chest, and maternal instinct overrode everything else. I ran for the stairs. The bedroom he'd indicated was warm and comfortable, with thick curtains that blocked out the night. I settled on the bed with Asher, my enhanced hearing picking up every sound from below. Kane's voice, raised in alpha command, "We know she's in there. Send her out." Damon's reply, calm and unmoved, "You're trespassing." On whose authority? That was Celine, her tone sharp with entitled indignation. "This isn't pack territory." "No," Damon agreed. "It's mine." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Then Kane spoke again, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. "We don't want trouble. We just want the Omega." "Why?" "She's unstable. Dangerous. She attacked pack members before she fled." The lie made my hands clench into fists. I'd never raised a finger against anyone in the pack, despite years of their abuse. "Interesting." Damon's voice carried a note of dark amusement. "And you feel responsible for cleaning up this mess?" "She was my mate." Kane's admission sounded reluctant. "Before I came to my senses." "Ah." The single syllable held volumes of understanding. "And now you're concerned she might cause problems for your new arrangement." "Something like that." "I see." A pause, then, "No." "What?" I said no. "She's under my protection now." "Leave." "You can't be serious." That was Alpha Ravencrest, his voice booming with outrage. "We outnumber you 6-1. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about wolf dynamics. The temperature plummeted so fast that frost began forming on the bedroom windows. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing down with weight that made my bones ache. Downstairs, someone made a choked sound of terror. When Damon spoke again, his voice carried undertones that vibrated through the cabin's frame, through my chest, through my very soul. 6-1. He sounded genuinely amused. "Those are interesting odds." The sound that followed wasn't quite a howl and wasn't quite a roar. It was something older, something that made every predatory instinct I possessed curl up in submission. Through the floorboards, I heard the unmistakable sounds of large bodies hitting the ground. Then silence. Minutes passed before Damon's normal voice drifted up the stairs. "It's safe now, Lyra." I found him in the kitchen, calmly continuing to prepare the meal he'd started before the interruption. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence that 6 aggressive wolves had just been on his doorstep making threats. "Where are they?" "Gone." He didn't look up from the pan where something delicious was sizzling. "They won't be back." "Just like that?" "Just like that." I settled Asher in a basket Damon had produced from somewhere, then studied the man who'd just made an entire pack of aggressive wolves disappear without breaking a sweat. "What are you?" "Hungry." He plated the food and gestured to the table. "Sit. Eat. Your body needs fuel to finish healing." The meal was incredible, rich stew with meat I couldn't identify, bread that was still warm from the oven, vegetables that tasted like they'd been picked that morning despite the season. I ate with desperate efficiency, my enhanced metabolism demanding more calories than my human form had ever required. Damon watched me with those unsettling silver eyes, his own meal barely touched. "Better?" he asked when I finally slowed down. "Much." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." "Why not?" "Because you don't know what you've gotten yourself into." He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the forest. "The power you've awakened, it comes with responsibilities. Enemies. A destiny that's much larger than revenge against one insignificant pack." The moon spirits didn't exactly provide a manual. "No, they rarely do." He turned back to me, and for a moment, his expression was almost gentle. "They prefer to let us figure things out through trial and error. Usually painful error." "You sound like you speak from experience." "I do." Asher made a soft sound from his basket, and both Damon and I looked toward him automatically. What we saw made my heart skip several beats. My 3-day-old son was sitting up. Not just propped up, actually sitting, his back straight and his silver blue eyes alert and focused. When he saw us watching, he smiled. "That's impossible," I breathed. "Is it?" Damon moved to the basket, his movements careful and respectful. "Hello, little prince." Asher reached up with perfect coordination, his tiny fingers grasping at the air between them. When Damon extended one large finger, Asher gripped it with surprising strength. "His development is accelerated," Damon said, his voice thoughtful. "Common in children of awakened bloodlines, but usually not this dramatic." "How do you know so much about this?" "Because I've seen it before. Because I've lived it." He looked up at me, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Because I've been alone for a very long time, waiting for someone who might understand." "Understand what?" "What it means to be different. To carry power that others fear." He straightened, and the vulnerability was gone, replaced by careful neutrality. "To be the last of your kind." The words hit me like a physical blow. Last of my kind? The old bloodlines were hunted to extinction centuries ago. Packs feared what they couldn't control, couldn't predict. They systematically eliminated any wolf who carried the ancient gifts. His smile was bitter. "They were very thorough. But I'm here. Asher's here." "Yes." He moved closer, his presence both intimidating and oddly comforting. "Which means either they weren't as thorough as they believed, or you're not the only one who's been hiding in plain sight." The implications made my head spin. "Are you saying you're like you?" "In some ways." He sat across from me again, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "Though my gifts manifested differently. Longer ago." "How much longer?" "Does it matter?" "Everything matters now. You said yourself that I need to understand what I've become." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if weighing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I was born during the last great purge. My pack was slaughtered when I was barely old enough to shift." His fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "I survived by learning to hide what I was, to blend in with normal wolves while I grew strong enough to protect myself." "How long ago?" 300 years, give or take a decade. The number hung in the air between us like a challenge to everything I thought I knew about reality. Wolves didn't live for centuries. We were lucky to see 80 years, maybe 90 if we were strong and careful. That's impossible. So is awakening a dormant bloodline with a desperate prayer to moon spirits most wolves consider myth. He leaned forward, and I caught another wave of that intoxicating scent. Yet here you are. Asher chose that moment to make another impossibly advanced movement, rolling from his back to his stomach and pushing up on his tiny arms like he was trying to crawl. When he succeeded in lifting his chest off the basket's padding, he looked directly at Damon and made a sound that was definitely trying to be a word. "He knows you," I said, wonder creeping into my voice. Children of the old bloodlines recognize their own. Damon's expression softened as he watched Asher's efforts. Even at his age, his instincts are awakening. "Is that why you were waiting? For him?" "I was waiting for both of you." He met my eyes, and the intensity there made my breath catch. The prophecies spoke of a child born during the blood moon, to a mother who would awaken the ancient gifts through desperate necessity. A child who would bridge the old ways and the new. Prophecies? The moon spirits don't just grant power randomly, Lyra. They choose their vessels carefully, for specific purposes. He gestured toward Asher, who was now attempting to coordinate his movements well enough to actually crawl. "Your son isn't just advanced. He's the key to everything." "The key to what?" "To ending the purge. To bringing the old bloodlines back from the edge of extinction. To showing the modern packs that power comes in many forms, and some of them are far older and stronger than they ever imagined." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy cloak. "You're talking about war." I'm talking about balance. Damon stood and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. For 3 centuries, I've watched the packs grow complacent, cruel, focused on nothing but hierarchy and control. They've forgotten what wolves were meant to be. And what were we meant to be? Connected to the earth, to the moon, to the ancient magics that flow through everything. He turned back to me, and his silver eyes were blazing. We were meant to be guardians, not dictators. Protectors, not predators of our own kind. That sounds idealistic. Does it? He moved closer, and I found myself holding my breath. Tell me, in your years with the Black Moon Pack, how often did you feel truly protected? How many times did the strong use their power to shelter the weak rather than exploit them? Never. The answer was never, but admitting it felt like betraying everything I'd been taught about pack loyalty. Cain protected me, I said weakly. Cain used you. There's a difference. Damon's voice was gentle but implacable. Real protection doesn't come with conditions. Real strength doesn't require submission from those you care about. As if to prove his point, Asher succeeded in his crawling attempt, moving across the basket with determination that was startling in something so young. When he reached the edge, he looked up at both of us and made another sound that was definitely an attempt at communication. Duh, he said clearly. Duh. My heart stopped. 3-day-old babies didn't talk. Didn't crawl. Didn't look at strangers with recognition and affection. He's not normal, I whispered. No, Damon agreed, reaching down to carefully lift Asher from the basket. He's extraordinary. The sight of my tiny son cradled in Damon's powerful arms did something strange to my chest. It felt right in a way that defied logic, as if this was how things were meant to be. This is all happening too fast, I said, pressing my palms against my temples. 3 days ago I was just an omega. Now I'm apparently some kind of magical wolf with a genius baby and a mysterious alpha who's been waiting centuries for us to show up. The old magic doesn't work on mortal timelines, Damon said, settling back on the couch with Asher still in his arms. When it awakens, everything accelerates. Your healing, your son's development, your connection to powers you never knew existed. And my connection to you? The question slipped out before I could stop it, but I found I didn't want to take it back. There was something between us, something that went beyond gratitude or convenience. Damon's eyes darkened. That's more complicated. I'm getting used to complicated. Are you? He studied my face intently. Because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about fate and choice and the bonds that tie wolves together. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break, but inside the cabin, the air felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Asher had fallen asleep in Damon's arms, looking completely content and safe. Looking like he belonged there. Tell me, I said, meeting his silver gaze directly. Tell me everything. Damon was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking gently along Asher's cheek. When he finally spoke, his words shattered the last of my preconceptions about how the world worked. The moon spirits don't just awaken dormant power, Lyra. They also awaken dormant bonds. Connections that were forged long before either of us was born. His eyes found mine across the dim room. I wasn't just waiting for the return of the old bloodlines. I was waiting for my true mate. The mate bond I'd felt stirring since the moment I met him suddenly blazed to life, but it felt nothing like the connection I'd shared with Cain. This was deeper, older, written into the very fabric of reality. That's impossible, I whispered. So was everything else that's happened in the last 3 days. He stood, still cradling Asher, and moved toward me with predatory grace. The question is, are you brave enough to accept what the spirits have given you? Or will you run from this too? Outside, new howls echoed through the night, but these weren't from Cain's hunting party. These were wild and strange and ancient, as if Damon's presence was calling to things that had been sleeping in the deep forest for far too long. As if the old magic was waking up everywhere, and our little family was at the center of something much bigger than revenge or survival. Something that would reshape the world of wolves forever. Chapter 3. I barely slept that first night in Damon's cabin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kane's golden one staring back at me with cold indifference, heard Celine's laughter echoing through my dreams. But worse than the memories were the new sensations coursing through my body, power that felt like liquid lightning in my veins, begging to be released. When dawn finally broke, I found Damon already awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. He was dressed in dark jeans and a simple black sweater, but somehow managed to look like he could command armies with a single word. "How do you feel?" he asked without turning around. "Different." I settled Asher in his basket, marveling again at how alert he was for a 4-day-old baby. "Restless. Like there's something crawling under my skin, trying to get out. That's the power-seeking expression. The longer you suppress it, the more volatile it becomes." He finally faced me, and those silver eyes were serious. "We need to begin your training today." "Training for what?" "For controlling what you've awakened before it controls you." He moved to a cabinet and pulled out what looked like ancient leather-bound journals. "Your bloodline carries abilities that haven't been seen in the modern world for over 2 centuries. Without proper guidance, they could destroy you. Or worse, they could destroy everything around you." The weight of his words settled heavily in my chest. "What if I don't want this power?" "The moon spirits don't ask permission, Lyra. They chose you for a reason." His expression softened slightly. "But I can teach you to harness what you've been given. To use it purposefully instead of letting it use you." An hour later, we stood in a clearing behind his cabin, the morning air crisp with the promise of spring. Damon had changed into clothes that looked designed for movement, fitted leather pants and a shirt that clung to his muscled frame in ways that were decidedly distracting. "First lesson," he said, moving to stand behind me. "Feel the power. Don't fight it, don't try to direct it. Just acknowledge that it's there." I closed my eyes and reached inward, searching for the strange new energy that had been humming beneath my skin since the awakening. It wasn't hard to find. It pulsed with my heartbeat, warm and electric and utterly foreign. "Good," Damon murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Now try to understand what it wants." What it wanted? I focused deeper, trying to interpret the alien sensation. The power felt hungry, restless, like a caged predator pacing behind bars. And underneath that restlessness was something darker, a cold satisfaction that made my stomach clench with unease. "It wants to hurt something," I whispered. "What does it want to hurt?" Images flashed through my mind unbidden, Kane's throat beneath my claws, Celine's perfect face twisted with fear, the entire Black Moon pack cowering before me as they had once made me cower. The power surged in response to the thoughts, and I gasped, my eyes snapping open. "I can't do this." "You have to." Damon's hands settled on my shoulders, steady and grounding. The power responds to emotion, particularly negative emotion. Until you learn to control your feelings, you'll never control your abilities. Then maybe I shouldn't have them. "Look around you, Lyra." I followed his gaze and felt my heart stop. The grass in a perfect circle around us had turned brown and brittle, as if winter had suddenly claimed this one spot while leaving everything else untouched. Even worse, the wildflowers that had been blooming at the clearing's edge were now withered and black, their petals falling like ash. "I did that? Your anger did that. Your pain. Your desire for revenge." Damon moved to examine one of the dead flowers, his expression troubled. "This is why your bloodline was feared, Lyra. Why they were hunted to extinction." "What do you mean?" He straightened, holding the blackened flower between his fingers. "You're descended from the moon wraiths, the Deathbringers. They were wolves who could manipulate the life force itself, could drain it from their enemies and use it to strengthen themselves or their allies." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Deathbringers?" "They weren't evil," Damon said quickly, seeing my expression. "They were guardians of balance. In the old days, when packs grew too large or too aggressive, when alphas became tyrants who threatened the survival of all wolves, the moon wraiths would appear to restore equilibrium. By killing people. By ending threats to the greater good. His silver eyes were steady on mine. They could sense corruption, could identify those whose actions would doom entire bloodlines if left unchecked. They were the immune system of wolf society. And now I'm one of them. You're the last of them. He dropped the dead flower and moved closer. Which means the responsibility for deciding how that power is used rests entirely with you. The thought was terrifying. I'd never wanted responsibility for anything beyond my own survival. Now Damon was telling me I carried the power to decide who lived and who died. I won't kill anyone, I said firmly. Even Cain? Even Celine? Even the pack members who threw stones at your newborn son and left you both to die? The questions hit deeper than they should have. Because the truth was, part of me did want revenge. Part of me wanted to make them all pay for the years of humiliation, for the rejection, for the cruelty they'd shown to an innocent baby. That's different. Is it? Damon stepped closer, his presence both comforting and challenging. Tell me, if you had the power to ensure that no other Omega ever suffered what you suffered, that no other child was ever rejected for being born to the wrong parents, would you use it? I stopped, because I didn't know the answer. It's not that simple. No, it's not. Which is why you need training. Why you need to understand not just how to use your abilities, but when and why and at what cost. He gestured to the dead circle around us. This happened because you let emotion drive the power. Learn to drive it yourself, and you become something extraordinary. Fail, and you become exactly what they always said the moon wraiths were, monsters. We spent the next 3 hours working on basic control exercises. Damon taught me to breathe through the power surges, to channel them into specific focuses instead of letting them explode outward randomly. It was exhausting work that left me drained and shaky, but by midday I could at least touch the energy without immediately destroying plant life. Better, Damon said as we walked back toward the cabin. Though you'll need weeks of practice before you can safely use your abilities in any kind of confrontation. What if I don't have weeks? What do you mean? I stopped walking, a sudden chill of premonition running down my spine. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Damon went very still beside me, his head tilting as if listening to sounds I couldn't hear. After a moment, his expression darkened. You're right. There are wolves in the forest. Multiple packs, moving in coordinated patterns. Cain? No. These scents are unfamiliar. His silver eyes began to glow with inner light. Someone's hunting, but not for you. We reached the cabin to find Asher wide awake in his basket, his silver blue eyes focused on something beyond the windows. When he saw us, he made an urgent sound that was definitely trying to communicate something important. What is it, little prince? Damon asked, lifting him carefully. Asher pointed toward the forest with one tiny finger, his expression solemn beyond his days. When he opened his mouth, the word that emerged made my blood freeze. Revenge. It was clear, unmistakable, and spoken with an intelligence that no 4-day-old should possess. But more than that, it was spoken with a satisfaction that seemed far too adult, too knowing. That's impossible, I breathed. Nothing's impossible anymore, Damon said grimly. The question is what he's sensing that we're not. His answer came in the form of howls from the direction of Black Moon territory, not the organized hunting calls we'd heard the night before, but sounds of panic and chaos. Through the trees, I could see smoke rising in the distance. Something's happening to the pack, I said, and despite everything they'd done to me, my first instinct was concern. Yes. Damon's voice was flat. And I suspect it's connected to your awakening. What do you mean? Ancient power calls to ancient enemies, Lyra. The moon wraiths had adversaries, bloodlines that were their natural opposites. If one awakens. He trailed off, his expression growing increasingly troubled. If one awakens, what? Then the others may wake as well. Before I could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the afternoon air. Multiple engines, moving fast up the mountain road toward us. Damon moved to the window, his posture going predatory. We have company. A convoy of black SUVs was winding up the narrow road to his cabin, their windows tinted so dark I couldn't see the occupants. They moved with military precision, and something about their approach made every instinct I possessed scream danger. "Friends of yours?" I asked. "I don't have friends." Damon's voice had gone cold and lethal. "Take Asher upstairs. Lock the door. Don't come down no matter what you hear. I'm not hiding again. You're not trained enough to fight what's coming." His silver eyes blazed as he looked at me. "And if something happens to me, Asher needs his mother." The vehicles had stopped at the edge of his property. Doors slammed in rapid succession, and through the windows I caught glimpses of figures dressed in tactical gear. They moved like soldiers, but their scents carried undertones that marked them as wolves. "Who are they?" "The Council." Damon's expression had gone grim. "The organization that's been hunting bloodlines like ours for centuries." "But you said the purges ended." "I said the systematic slaughter ended. The Council never stopped hunting. They just became more selective, more careful." He pulled weapons from hidden compartments I hadn't known existed, knives that gleamed with silver edges, what looked like modified crossbow bolts. "They must have detected your awakening." "How?" "Ancient power leaves traces. Ripples in the magical currents that trained hunters can follow." He pressed a pistol into my hands. "Silver bullets. Aim for center mass, don't hesitate, and remember that they'll try to take you alive if possible." "Why alive?" "Because dead moon wraiths can't be interrogated about other survivors." The implication sent ice through my veins. "There are others?" "Maybe. Probably. Hidden bloodlines scattered across the world, living normal lives until something triggers their awakening." His smile was sharp and bitter. "Congratulations, Lyra. You just painted a target on every potential moon wraith descendant in existence." Before I could respond, a voice called out from the front yard, male, authoritative, with the kind of confidence that came from absolute certainty in one's power. "Damon Blackthorne. We know you're in there. We know what you're harboring." "Blackthorne." I filed the surname away even as my mind reeled from everything else. The Council knew Damon's real name, knew he was here, knew about me. "Come out peacefully, and the woman and child won't be harmed," the voice continued. "We only want to talk." "Liars," Damon muttered. "They want to study you, dissect your abilities, find out how to track others like you." "And if we refuse?" "Then they'll take you by force." Through the window, I could see at least a dozen figures positioned around the cabin. They'd surrounded us completely, cutting off any chance of escape. But more disturbing was the way they moved, too fluid, too coordinated. These weren't normal wolves. "What are they?" "Enhanced. Artificially strengthened with stolen bloodline abilities." Damon's voice carried centuries of hatred. "They hunt us, kill us, then use our power to make themselves stronger." The thought made my stomach turn. That's monstrous. That's survival. From their perspective. He moved to another window, checking the positions of our attackers. "They see us as threats to pack stability, anomalies that need to be eliminated or controlled." "You have 10 seconds, the voice called out. "Then we come in." Asher made another sound from his basket, not distressed, but alert. When I looked at him, his silver eyes were focused on the windows with an intensity that was unsettling. He wasn't afraid. If anything, he seemed eager. "There's something wrong with my son," I whispered. "No," Damon said softly. "There's something extraordinary about him. Moon wraith children develop fast, but this." He trailed off, studying Asher's too knowing expression. "This is beyond anything I've seen. Time's up." The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. Windows exploded inward as dark figures rappelled through them, moving with inhuman speed and coordination. I saw silver flashing in their hands, weapons designed specifically for killing our kind. Damon moved like liquid death, his own weapons finding their targets with lethal precision. But there were too many of them, and they kept coming. Upstairs, he shouted over the sounds of combat. Now! But as I reached for Asher's basket, something extraordinary happened. My son, my 4-day-old baby, looked directly at the nearest attacker and smiled. The man stopped mid-stride, his face going slack. Then he turned and buried his silver knife in his teammate's chest. What, I started to say, but there was no time for questions. More attackers were pouring through the broken windows. Damon was holding his own, but barely. And Asher was doing something that should have been impossible, his infant mind somehow reaching out to twist the intentions of our enemies. The power inside me responded to the chaos, to the threat to my family. It surged upward like a dark tide, and this time I didn't try to stop it. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began forming on every surface as the life force was leached from the air itself. The attackers closest to me stumbled, their enhanced strength suddenly failing as something vital was drained from their bodies. Lyra, no. Damon's voice cut through the growing darkness. You're not ready. But I was beyond listening. The power had found its target, not just these attackers, but the organization they represented. The council that had spent centuries hunting people like us, like my son. They wanted to study us? Dissect us? Let them try. The nearest council operative dropped to his knees, his enhanced abilities failing as my power wrapped around him like a hungry shadow. Through the connection, I could feel his artificial strength, the stolen abilities that had been grafted onto his natural wolf heritage. And I could take them back. The sensation was intoxicating, raw power flowing into me as I drained the enhancements from his system. But beneath the stolen abilities was something else, something that made me gasp and nearly lose my focus. Fear. Pure, absolute terror of what I represented. Because the council didn't just hunt moon wraiths out of prejudice or politics. They hunted us because they knew what we were capable of when fully awakened. They knew that a single moon wraith could bring down entire packs, could shift the balance of power across the supernatural world. They knew we were apex predators, and they were prey. Enough. The command cut through my power-drunk haze like a blade. Not from Damon, but from someone else, a woman's voice carrying authority that made my abilities recoil instinctively. A figure stepped through the ruined front door, and I knew immediately that this was the real threat. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair that marked her as ancient even by wolf standards. But it was her eyes that stopped my heart, completely black, like looking into empty space. Hello, Lyra, she said calmly, as if we were meeting for tea instead of in the middle of a supernatural battle. I'm Director Frost. We need to talk. The power inside me snarled in response to her presence, recognizing something fundamentally wrong about her energy signature. She wasn't enhanced like the others. She was something else entirely. Like hell, I snarled back. Your son is in danger, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Not from us, but from what he's becoming. Look at him, Lyra. Really look. Against my better judgment, I glanced toward Asher's basket. What I saw there made my blood freeze. He was floating. My 4-day-old son was hovering 6 inches above his blankets, his silver eyes glowing with power that had no business existing in something so young. And around him, the air itself was beginning to warp and twist, reality bending to accommodate abilities that shouldn't awaken for years. That's impossible, I breathed. Nothing's impossible when you're dealing with a convergence child, Director Frost said. A baby born during the awakening of multiple bloodlines, whose very existence acts as a catalyst for powers that have been dormant for centuries. What are you talking about? Your son isn't just a moon wraith, Lyra. He's something new, something unprecedented. Her black eyes fixed on Asher with an intensity that made me want to put myself between them. And if his development isn't carefully managed, he could tear holes in reality itself. The words hit me like physical blows. You're lying. Am I? She gestured toward the windows, and I saw something that made my knees weak. The forest beyond the cabin was changing. Trees were growing and dying and regrowing in rapid cycles, as if time itself was fluctuating around us. The very fabric of reality was becoming unstable, and at the center of it all was my floating, glowing, impossible son. He needs training, Director Frost continued. Guidance from people who understand convergence magic. Come with us willingly, and we'll help him learn control. Refuse, and watch him accidentally destroy everything within a 100-mile radius. Don't listen to her, Damon said, but his voice was strained. The council doesn't help. They exploit. And what's your alternative? Director Frost asked coolly. Hope he grows out of it. Pray that his power stabilizes on its own. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Convergence children who don't receive proper training don't live to see their first birthday, Damon. Their own abilities consume them from within. I looked between them, Damon, who had saved us but still hadn't told me everything he knew, Director Frost, who terrified me but might be telling the truth about Asher's danger, and my son, who was growing more powerful by the hour in ways that defied every law of nature I understood. What do you want? I asked finally. Partnership, Director Frost said. Your cooperation in exchange for Asher's survival and training. And if I refuse? Her smile was colder than winter. Then you'll bury your son before the week is out, and the reality fluctuations he causes in his death throes will probably take half the continent with him. In the distance, the sounds of chaos from Black Moon territory were growing louder. Whatever was happening there was escalating, and I had a terrible feeling it was connected to the power radiating from my floating, impossible child. The woman was right about one thing: Asher needed help that I couldn't provide. But trusting the people who had spent centuries hunting our kind felt like signing our death warrants. I need time to think, I said. Time is a luxury we don't have. Director Frost gestured again, and the reality fluctuations around us intensified. Every minute he remains untrained increases the risk of catastrophic failure. Asher chose that moment to speak again, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around us. Revenge, he said, and this time there was no mistaking the intelligence behind the word. He wasn't just speaking, he was making a pronouncement. And as if in response to his declaration, the howls from Black Moon territory suddenly cut off, leaving behind a silence that felt like the pause before lightning strikes. Whatever was happening to Kane's pack, it had just reached its conclusion. Director Frost's black eyes narrowed. The convergence is accelerating. We're out of time. But before anyone could respond, new sounds emerged from the forest, not howls this time, but screams. Human screams, filled with terror and agony. Something was hunting in Black Moon territory. Something that left silence in its wake. What have you done? Director Frost demanded, her composed mask finally cracking. Asher smiled up at her from his floating position, and when he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. Justice, he said clearly. And in that moment, I realized that my son wasn't just developing too quickly. He was becoming something entirely new, something that combined the death-bringing power of the moon wraiths with abilities that existed beyond anything the old bloodlines had ever achieved. The council wanted to study him. Damon wanted to protect him. But neither of them understood what he truly was. He was evolution itself, wrapped in the form of a baby who could speak prophecies and bend reality to his will. The question was whether any of us would survive long enough to see what he became. The screaming from Black Moon territory suddenly stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. We need to go, Director Frost said, her voice tight with something that might have been fear. All of us. Now. Go where? I asked. Anywhere that isn't here when he decides to act on that promise of justice. But even as she spoke, I could feel it, Asher's power reaching out across the forest, seeking the pack that had rejected us. And whatever he was planning, whatever justice he intended to deliver, I had the terrible feeling that it was already too late to stop it. The blood moon was rising, and my son had just declared war on everyone who had ever wronged us. The only question was whether anyone would be left alive to surrender. Chapter 4. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, broken only by the distant crackling of flames from Black Moon territory. Director Frost's black eyes darted between Asher's floating form and the growing orange glow on the horizon, her composed mask finally showing cracks of genuine concern. This is unprecedented, she murmured, more to herself than to us. Convergence children don't develop this level of reality manipulation until they're much older, Damon finished grimly. Which means someone has been accelerating his development artificially. The accusation in his voice made Director Frost's head snap toward him. You think we're responsible? I think the Council has been manipulating bloodline awakenings for centuries. His silver eyes blazed with barely contained fury. Creating weapons out of children who should have grown up normal and safe. We don't create anything, Director Frost said coldly. We simply guide inevitable outcomes. Before I could ask what that meant, Asher made a soft sound that drew all our attention. He had settled back into his basket, no longer floating, but his silver blue eyes remained fixed on something beyond the cabin walls. When he spoke, his voice carried the eerie certainty of prophecy. They come, he said clearly. The broken pack seeks the truth. As if summoned by his words, new howls echoed through the forest, closer than the chaos from Black Moon territory, and moving toward us with desperate speed. But these weren't the organized hunting calls we'd heard before. These were the sounds of wolves running for their lives. Survivors, Director Frost said, her tactical gear suddenly appearing in her hands as if materialized from thin air. This complicates things. Everything's been complicated since the moment I met you people, I snapped, checking the silver-loaded pistol Damon had given me. What aren't you telling me about what's happening to the pack? What's happening, Damon said quietly, is justice. Long overdue justice. Something in his tone made me look at him sharply. There was a satisfaction there, a grim pleasure that made my stomach clench with unease. Damon? But before he could answer, the first refugees burst into the clearing around his cabin. 3 wolves in human form, their clothes torn and bloodied, their eyes wide with terror. I recognized them immediately: Beta Marcus, who had stood silent while stones were thrown at my newborn son, Sarah Chen, who had laughed when Cain rejected me, and Thomas Wright, one of the younger warriors who had always followed pack orders without question. They saw the Council operatives and immediately shifted into defensive positions, but their attention kept darting toward the cabin, toward us. Where is she? Marcus demanded, his voice hoarse from running. Where's the Omega? Safe, Director Frost said neutrally. What happened to your pack? It's gone. Sarah's voice broke on the words. They're all gone. The Alpha, the Luna, everyone who stayed for the mating ceremony. There's nothing left but... She shuddered. Nothing left but ash and shadows. What attacked you? Damon asked, and I caught something strange in his expression, not surprise, but a kind of grim confirmation, as if he'd been expecting this news. We don't know, Thomas said. Something that moved like smoke, that killed without leaving marks. People just collapsed. Like their life force was being drained away. The description sent ice through my veins. Death magic. Someone with abilities like mine had destroyed the Black Moon pack. How many survived? Director Frost was already calculating, her tactical mind assessing threats and opportunities. Maybe a dozen, Marcus said. Those who were out on patrol, or hunting, or... His eyes found mine through the cabin window. Those who were smart enough to leave before the ceremony began. Before the ceremony, I repeated slowly. You mean Cain and Celine's mating? The ceremony that was supposed to cement his claim to the Alpha position, Sarah said bitterly. The ceremony that was supposed to prove he was strong enough to lead. Her laugh was edged with hysteria. Turns out he wasn't strong enough to survive his own wedding. I should have felt something, grief, regret, maybe even a twisted satisfaction. Cain had destroyed my life, rejected our son, left us to die in the snow. But all I felt was a hollow numbness, as if the part of me that could care about his fate had been burned away along with everything else. Who do you think is responsible? Director Frost asked. Marcus's eyes locked onto mine through the window, and his expression hardened with certainty. Her. The Omega. She did this. That's impossible, I said, stepping outside with Asher in my arms. I've been here the entire time. Have you? Marcus's voice carried the authority of his beta rank, but underneath I could hear fear. Or have you been learning things? Awakening things that should have stayed buried? I had nothing to do with what happened to the pack. Didn't you? Thomas stepped forward, his young face twisted with grief and anger. You disappear into the wilderness, and 3 days later our entire pack is wiped out by death magic? That's one hell of a coincidence. It is a coincidence, I insisted, but even as I said it, doubt began creeping in. The timing was suspicious, and I knew my power had been growing stronger, more volatile. What if something I'd done during training had somehow reached across the forest? What if my rage and desire for revenge had manifested in ways I didn't understand? Lyra didn't attack your pack, Damon said firmly. She's been with me, learning to control abilities she barely understands. And who are you to vouch for her? Sarah demanded. Some rogue alpha living in the woods? How do we know you're not both involved in this? Damon went very still, and something shifted in the air around him, a pressure that made every wolf present take an involuntary step backward. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in our bones. I am Damon Blackthorn, he said quietly. Rightful alpha of the Black Moon Pack. Son of Alpha Magnus Blackthorn, who was murdered 20 years ago by a usurper named Connor Kane. The words hit like a physical blow. Kane's father. The previous alpha who had died in what everyone said was a hunting accident, leaving the pack leadership open for Connor's claim. That's impossible, Marcus breathed. Magnus Blackthorn had no surviving children. Connor made sure of that. Connor thought he made sure of that, Damon corrected, his silver eyes beginning to glow. He killed my parents, my siblings, even my mate. Burned our family compound to the ground and scattered the ashes. But I wasn't there that night. I was 18 years old, out on a vision quest in the deep wilderness, seeking guidance from the moon spirits about my future role as Alpha. My mind reeled as the implications sank in. Kane's father murdered your family? And then spent 20 years spreading lies about what happened. Telling the pack that Magnus had gone rogue, that he'd been experimenting with dark magic that threatened everyone's safety. Damon's voice was bitter with old pain. The same lies they're probably telling about you right now. You knew, I whispered, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. You knew who I was before you found me. Knew about Kane, about the pack, about everything. I'd been watching the Black Moon Pack for 2 decades, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was stolen from my family. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the guilt flickering in his silver eyes. I knew Kane was weak, knew his leadership was built on his father's lies and violence. I was looking for leverage, for something that could be used to expose the truth. And then I appeared. A rejected Omega with awakening powers and a vendetta against the current Alpha. The betrayal cut deeper than Kane's claws ever had. How convenient for you. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? I stepped back, clutching Asher protectively. You said you'd been waiting for a moon wraith descendant. You said the spirits had told you about us. But really, you were just waiting for someone desperate enough to be your weapon. The connection between us is real, Lyra. The mate bond. The mate bond is just another tool, isn't it? Another way to control me, to make sure I'd do what you wanted. My power was responding to my emotional turmoil, the air around us growing cold with the promise of death magic. How long were you planning to wait before telling me the truth? I was going to tell you everything once you were ready. Ready for what? Ready to help you murder an entire pack? The words came out louder than I'd intended, and I saw the council operatives shifting positions, preparing for potential violence. I didn't kill anyone, Damon said firmly. Whatever destroyed the Black Moon Pack, it wasn't me. But you're glad they're dead. It wasn't a question. I could see it in his face, the grim satisfaction that he wasn't quite able to hide. You're glad someone finished what you couldn't. Before he could answer, more howls echoed through the forest, but these were different from the panicked calls of the survivors. These were hunting howls, coordinated and purposeful, coming from multiple directions. More survivors? Director Frost asked. No, Marcus said grimly. Enforcers. Kane's elite guard. They weren't at the ceremony because they were out searching for. His eyes found mine again. For her. How many? Thomas was already shifting into a defensive stance. 20, maybe 25 of the pack's best warriors. Sarah's face was pale with fear. They'll be looking for someone to blame for what happened. Someone to punish. Then we need to leave, Director Frost said decisively. My people can provide escort. No. The word came from Asher, spoken with an authority that silenced everyone in the clearing. He was looking directly at the approaching forest with those impossible silver blue eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice carried prophetic certainty. They come for justice. They will receive it. Asher, no, I whispered, but I could already feel it, his power reaching out like invisible tendrils, searching for the approaching wolves. Let them come, he said, and his infant features were serene with the kind of peace that preceded terrible violence. Let them learn what happens to those who serve the corrupt. The first Black Moon warrior emerged from the tree line just as Asher finished speaking. It was Jake Morrison, one of Kane's most loyal enforcers, his face twisted with grief and rage. Behind him came others, wolves I recognized, wolves who had stood silent while I was abused, who had participated in the cruelty that defined pack hierarchy. There she is, Jake snarled, pointing directly at me. The Omega who brought this curse down on us. I didn't, I started to say, but he was already shifting, his human form melting into the massive brown wolf that had terrorized lesser pack members for years. The others followed suit, 23 wolves surrounding us in a perfect circle of snarling fury. They wanted blood, wanted someone to pay for the destruction of everything they'd known. And they'd decided that someone was me. Stand down, Director Frost commanded, but her voice was lost in the chorus of growls and snapping teeth. They won't listen, Damon said, his own form beginning to shimmer with the promise of shifting. They're beyond reason. Then we fight, I said, raising the silver-loaded pistol. But even as I prepared to defend myself, I could feel Asher's power building like storm pressure in the air. My son was preparing to do something that would change everything, and I had the terrible certainty that once he acted, there would be no going back. Don't, I whispered to him. Please, Asher. Don't become what they say you are. But it was too late. The first wolf, Jake Morrison, launched himself toward me with lethal intent, and my infant son responded with power that defied every law of nature. Jake stopped mid-leap, his massive form freezing in the air as if caught in invisible amber. Around the circle, the other wolves began to whimper and back away as something fundamental in their reality shifted. What is that thing? One of them whispered. Asher smiled, and when he spoke, his voice echoed with harmonics that came from somewhere beyond the mortal world. I am justice, he said simply. I am balance. I am what comes after the corrupt have fallen. Jake Morrison dropped to the ground, no longer wolf but human again, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at my floating, glowing son. Around him, the other warriors were shifting back to human form involuntarily, their wolves unable to maintain shape in the presence of whatever Asher was becoming. Please, Jake whispered. We just want answers. We just want to understand what happened to our pack. What happened, Asher said with infinite gentleness, is that they reaped what they had sown. That they faced consequences for decades of cruelty and corruption. But we didn't. You stood silent. Asher's voice carried the weight of absolute judgment. You watched as the weak were tormented, as the innocent were cast out, as power was used to destroy rather than protect. Your silence made you complicit. I could feel the death magic building around my son, vast and terrible and completely beyond my ability to control. He was going to kill them all, every single warrior who had participated in the pack's cruelty. And part of me wanted to let him. Asher, stop, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Why? He asked, those ancient eyes finding mine. They would have killed you without hesitation. They would have torn me apart simply for existing. Why should they receive mercy they never showed? It was a fair question. A logical question. These wolves had made my life hell for years, had thrown stones at my newborn child, had hunted us through the forest with the intent to murder. They deserved whatever justice my son wanted to deliver. But if I let him do this, if I stood by while he executed 23 wolves for the crime of being complicit in pack politics, what did that make me? What did that make him? Because mercy is what separates us from them, I said finally. Because showing compassion to those who showed us none is how we prove we're better than they are. Asher considered this with the gravity of someone far older than his few days of life. Around us, the Black Moon warriors waited in terrified silence for his decision. Very well, he said at last. They may live. But they will remember what they have seen here. They will carry the message back to whatever remains of the supernatural world. What message? That the old bloodlines have returned. That the time of corrupt packs and cruel hierarchies is ending. His smile was beautiful and terrible. That a new age is beginning, whether the world is ready or not. With that pronouncement, he released his hold on the warriors. They collapsed to the ground, gasping and shaking, their eyes wide with the kind of existential terror that comes from confronting something completely beyond mortal understanding. Go, I told them. Leave. Don't come back. They fled without argument, disappearing into the forest with the desperate speed of prey escaping a predator. But I knew Asher was right, they would remember. They would tell others what they'd seen. Word would spread that something new and terrible had awakened in the wilderness. Something that could float as an infant and pass judgment like a god. Well, Director Frost said into the silence that followed. That was illuminating. Was it? I turned to face her, my patience finally exhausted. Or was it just another manipulation? Another test to see how much power my son could demonstrate? Her black eyes gave nothing away. What makes you think those things are mutually exclusive? Before I could demand a real answer, Damon stepped closer, his expression pleading. Lyra, I know you feel betrayed, but everything I told you about the mate bond, about caring for you and Asher, that was real. Was it? Or was I just a convenient tool for your revenge? I hefted Asher higher in my arms, noting that he seemed perfectly content despite having just terrorized 24 grown wolves. How do I know anything you've said is true? Because you can feel the bond between us. Because your wolf recognizes mine, regardless of the circumstances that brought us together. He was right, damn him. The mate bond thrummed between us like a living thing, stronger than anything I'd shared with Cain. But knowing that only made the betrayal worse. The bond doesn't excuse the lies. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. But it does mean that whatever else happens, we're connected now. For better or worse. And what if I decide it's for worse? Pain flashed across his silver eyes. Then I'll respect your choice. But I'll never stop trying to prove that what we have is worth fighting for. It would have been easier if he'd been cruel about it, if he'd demanded or commanded or threatened. Instead, he was giving me the one thing Cain never had, the power to choose. I need time, I said finally. Time to process everything that's happened. Time to figure out what I want versus what everyone else wants from me. Time we may not have, Director Frost interjected. Word of tonight's events will spread quickly. Other factions will want to claim or control Asher before his abilities fully manifest. Other factions? The Council isn't the only organization interested in bloodline management. There are groups that would use your son as a weapon, others that would worship him as a deity, and some that would simply want to study him until they understood how to replicate his abilities. The thought of anyone else trying to manipulate or harm Asher sent protective fury blazing through me. Then we disappear. Find somewhere remote where no one can find us. There is nowhere remote enough, Damon said grimly. Not for someone with his level of power. The magical signature he's creating can be detected from thousands of miles away. Then what do you suggest? We fight, he said simply. We gather allies, build strength, and prepare for the war that's coming whether we want it or not. War? The supernatural world has been balanced on a knife's edge for centuries, Director Frost explained. Artificial hierarchies, stolen power, bloodlines driven to near extinction. Your son's awakening has upset that balance. Change is coming, and it will be violent. I looked down at Asher, who was watching our conversation with those two intelligent eyes. He seemed so small, so innocent, despite everything I'd witnessed. But I could feel the vast power sleeping beneath his infant exterior, could sense the potential for both creation and destruction that defined his very existence. What if I refuse to fight? I asked. What if I just want to raise my son in peace? Then others will make the choices for you, Damon said. And when the dust settles, you'll find yourself exactly where you started, powerless, at the mercy of those who see you as nothing more than a tool to be used. The truth of his words hit home with painful clarity. I'd spent years as a victim of pack politics, had suffered because I was too weak to fight back. Now I had power, more power than I'd ever imagined, but with it came responsibilities I'd never wanted. If I agree to this, I said slowly, if I accept that war is inevitable, what then? How do we even begin to prepare for something like this? We start with truth, Damon said. No more lies, no more manipulation. We build something based on honesty and mutual respect instead of fear and control. And if the truth is that I can't trust you? If the truth is that you've been using me from the beginning? Then you'll have to decide if what I've given you, power, protection, knowledge, is worth the price I've asked for it. It was a fair question, and one I didn't have an answer for yet. But as I stood in the clearing surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd once known, holding my impossible son who could bend reality with a word, I realized that trust might be a luxury I couldn't afford. What mattered now was survival. What mattered was ensuring that Asher grew up free to choose his own path, rather than being molded into someone else's weapon. Everything else, including my feelings about Damon's deception, would have to wait. One condition, I said finally. No more secrets. If we're doing this, if we're preparing for war, then I need to know everything. About your past, about the bloodlines, about what my son is becoming. Everything. Agreed, Damon said without hesitation. And if I find out you're still lying to me, still manipulating situations for your own ends, then we're done. Mate bond or no mate bond. Understood. Director Frost cleared her throat. If you're quite finished negotiating, we need to move. The magical disturbance from tonight's events will draw attention from across the supernatural spectrum. We have perhaps 6 hours before this location becomes the center of a very unpleasant convergence. Where do we go? I asked. Somewhere we can make a stand, Damon said, his silver eyes already calculating. Somewhere defensible, where we can gather allies and prepare for what's coming. And what exactly is coming? Revolution, Asher said quietly from my arms, his infant voice carrying the weight of prophecy. The old ways are ending, Mother. The new world begins with us. As if to emphasize his point, the distant glow from Black Moon territory suddenly flared brighter, and through the enhanced senses my awakening had given me, I could smell something that made my blood freeze. More death magic. Something else was stirring in the supernatural world, something that had been awakened by the events of the last few days. We weren't the only ones preparing for war. The only question was whether we'd be fighting alongside each other or against everything that was coming to destroy us. But as I felt the mate bond humming between Damon and me, as I looked down at my son who could reshape reality with his will, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we had enough power to face whatever storm was brewing. The old world was ending. The new one would be written in blood and magic and the choices we made in the darkness. I just had to decide if I was brave enough to help write it. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for part 2.